Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast, recorded on stage at CDMO Live Europe 2026 in Rotterdam. This episode is sponsored by PharmaBlock, a fully integrated CRDMO providing research, development and manufacturing services from early discovery to commercial production.
When Outsourcing Goes Wrong, hosted by Raman Sehgal of Molecules to Market, so panellists will be sharing honest reflections and case studies of what really happens when CDMO partnerships don't go to plan.
There's a lot of focus that gets put on strategic relationships, strategic partnership, trusted relationships, collaboration. We thought we would flip that on its entire head today and focus on what happens when things go wrong. And certainly in my experience, timelines slip, expectations are mismatched, scope grows, communications can fail down. Anyone here that's worked in our sector knows that things don't always go to plan, which is what we're here to chat about today. And despite being great people on both sides of the fence, sometimes things get difficult. So for the next kind of 30 to 40 minutes or so, we're going to have a very candid, practical conversation, really kind of explores what happens when outsourcing goes wrong, the signs to watch out for, and what you can actually do about it to mitigate the risk and the relationship. For any of you that don't know who I am or missed the session, my name is Raman Sehgal. I wear a few different hats these days, but you can class me as a serial entrepreneur. I founded two businesses in our sector. One is a global marketing agency called Remarketing. The other one is a talent acquisition business called Lead Candidate. I'm also the host of the Molecule to Market podcast. Enough about me. I'm going to pass to my fantastic panel here to quickly maybe just give an introduction to yourself, who you are, what you do, and maybe the perspective that you bring. Oksana, I'm going to start with you at the other end of the panel. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Raman. And hi, I'm Oksana, and I'm representing Sopharma. We are a regional pharmaceutical company with a strong legacy in generics and own production facilities. While we produce much of our portfolio in-house, we selectively outsource. So I'm here to share the perspective of a smaller sponsor who's had to navigate the complexity of outsourcing carefully.
Thank you. Stefan.
Yeah, hey, I'm Stefan Bouckaert. I'm actually in a shifting position. I'm just finished off with J&J for 20 years. In the last 6-7 years, I was responsible as the VP of external quality, looking after everything externally. Be aware, J&J has like 55% of their activity externalized. I was managing 170 CMOs, all the supplier base, 5,500 suppliers, all the contract labs. So that's the perspective I will bring. Now, where I'm now, I'm starting up my own company. I started it up, and I'm actually bridging between pharma companies and CDMOs, because there is a lot of CDMOs there. You know, you saw it also in the analysis this morning, that have difficulties actually to play and participate and get to real partnerships with the pharma company. So I'm focusing on that area. I'm working currently these days also with UCB, but I'm also still have some time left also with other CDMOs that I'm working with. So yeah.
Did you say 170 CDMOs then?
Yeah.
God, yeah. That's a lot of CDMOs.
So I can certainly bring some perspective on that. So the good and the bad.
We're not going to ask you to name and shame. Don't worry. Although that might be fun. That might be for the boat party later on. Nick, maybe give your perspective and the perspective you're going to bring to the session today.
Yeah, all right. Hey everyone, I'm Nick. I'm the head of external manufacturing and strategic partnerships at Ferring Pharmaceuticals. We're a Swiss-based pharmaceutical company, mainly in the fertility, uro-oncology and gastroenterology field. I head up external manufacturing, so we oversee not 170, but a few dozen contract manufacturers. So besides the contract manufacturers themselves, I also oversee the manufacturing strategy related to it. My perspective is more from an operational element, as well as how you really navigate and foster partnerships. We heard it this morning, and I think at the foundation of everything we're going to talk about, governance and partnerships and how you navigate and build on that foundation, is really how I see the business evolving and growing, and that's really the next phase going into it, also echoed this morning.
Okay, thank you. Great to have you all here. I want to start with red flags and early warning signs. And before things go terribly wrong, there's normally a few kind of symptoms and signs that things are not going to plan. So, Nick, I'm going to maybe start with you to maybe give us a sense of when managing CDMO relationships, like what are the typical red flags or warning signs that maybe make you bristle and think something's not on track here?
I think you find yourself firefighting a lot. And firefighting without, obviously, we're all in the pharmaceutical business, right? So if something goes wrong, you expect that there's a corrective action, you have a CAPA plan, it's implemented. But if you're not addressing the structural root cause, that issue will keep reoccurring. And it tends to reoccur at moments that obviously are not very helpful for either of the parties. So having that frequent firefighting, not really structural, not really collaborative, and then that tension rises. So if you find yourself firefighting more than you should, then actually probably something is not working in either the setup, in the transparency, in the collaboration. And that should be a first red flag in terms of taking a step back and thinking about, okay, what can I do here? What should I think about? But that to me is a telltale sign that something is not working.
And we're gonna come on to this a little bit later, but in that situation where you recognize there's a lot of firefighting, do you look introspectively within your own organization first, or do you immediately think, right, CDMO, this is your fault?
So, no, that's not really a collaborative approach, is it? I think when something goes wrong, there are always two parties that are part of that, right? So the reality is you need to be critical of yourself. And I think, the starting point of a good partnership and relationship is having a clear foundation and understanding of what are the KPIs, how do you communicate around that? Personally, I love KPIs. I'm really heavy into dashboards. So you can see the trends coming, not just reactively, but proactively. I can predict for the next 30 weeks if my expected deliveries are going to be on track, because I know the exact production schedules. I know exactly what is planned. And then the moment you can see a trend developing over time. So you have an operational view, you have a performance view. And when you see certain KPIs in the performance view starting to have the wrong trend, that in itself is a trigger, right? But it's also on you. If you're not monitoring this, if you are not engaging with your tier one partners on a regular basis, one, you don't have a relationship. Two, you don't have transparency. So you must look at yourself on what is your role in this as a pharma company, and how do you collaborate together to build something that is sustainable and allows you to supply your patients. That is the ultimate objective.
Great perspective. Stefan, maybe give us a perspective on, you mentioned obviously the amount of CDMOs you've had to manage in your previous role. What were some of the early signs or early warning signs and red flags?
Of course, Nick's right. KPIs is already an indicator. But for me, what I want to bring to the table is also you have those conversations with the CEO, CQOs, and you see there is a discrepancy to what's happening on the shop floor. And I think if you work with the CMO, you work at different levels with the CMO, and then you have people running a PPQ or a water run or whatever, and they're starting to say this investigation is not solid. They don't understand what they're doing. But then you have the conversation at the senior level where they're showing commitment. And if you start to see there is a discrepancy between what's being said at a higher level and what's happening at the floor level, for me there's alarm bells. And then it's really it's about where things goes wrong. But I'm always how to prevent that things go worse. And then you start to bring your SMEs into the floor and the technical guys, whatever. So for me, that's a very important signal. But we'll certainly come back to later how we're preventing things. But yeah, metrics is one thing, but it's also and there I will bring it maybe back into this conversation. You need to be also well connected internally as a pharma company. So you maybe talk with your peer at the CMO level, but you have also to be going into your organization. People are traveling to the CMOs, they're working on certain things, and you need to listen to what's coming back. If there is a discrepancy, you have alarm bells, to my opinion.
Great perspective. And Oksana, from a kind of smaller regional perspective, do some of the points resonate with you, or is there something else you see as red flags and warning signs?
Yes, sure. For regional companies, I think also metrics and KPIs are very, very important. But here I would like to emphasize that there is a difference between handling smaller companies and global companies. From the beginning, when we started to work with CDMO, everything seems fine, yes. And it's like
it always is at the start. It's always fantastic at the start.
But then you can see some subtle delays or vague updates. And as a smaller sponsor with fewer resources or leverage, you don't want to push back the CDMO, and you can see signs like misaligned expectations, delays in response, lack of transparency. And for us also it's important to recognize and to see these signs as well.
And on that kind of takes me nicely onto the next question around, so obviously we've covered the warning signs, but I want to explore what actually does go wrong, because that can mean different things, right? It could be a capacity issue, it could be scope issue, it could be technical, data integrity, communications, priorities. The guys that did the Simon Kucher presentation today had a list of things up there, and there's some kind of mismatch between the buyer and the seller. So you guys obviously been outsourcing relatively recently. What's been some of the kind of common reasons, Oksana, that you've seen that have kind of led to the breakdown of a relationship or potential breakdown of a relationship?
I think misunderstanding between teams. Not always we would like to blame the CDMO, and it's not right strategy. And we had one case when we would like to blame the CDMO, but we reviewed the situations and we understood that our internal teams, procurement and technical teams, were not fully aligned. And it was our reason to spoil the relationship a little bit. And our smaller scope made us more exposed. Yes, because bigger clients come to CDMO, and also there is intention. And for us, it's not a good situation, but we try to manage. And smaller and original companies have limited influence to realign things.
It's an interesting perspective, actually, where you're effectively saying as a smaller customer to these CDMOs, your leverage is not as big as probably it's what the guys have experienced. Exactly. And Stefan, from your perspective, you again, you've got huge experience in this space. Are there any common, if you reflect back over particularly 20 years at J&J, common things that used to be, I'm not saying all of them, but maybe 1, 2 or 3 things that seem to be the breakdown of a relationship?
It's all about trust and culture, to my opinion. So you build trust, you want to see, again, you're talking with the senior guys about the contract, you do things, and then you want to see the signals that are delivering that. For me, of course, I'm looking also a little bit from a quality angle. That was my last responsibility. So you see that they're not always up to the standards, and they have not the ability, maybe not doing the right investment. So you see a breaking up, that commitment is breaking down a little bit. I will be honest, it's a tough one that I was saying, but if I said 170 CMOs, I maybe can count on my 2 hands the really perfect CMOs. Again, and that's not a problem. I will say that immediately, because what I always says when I was in my role, if you feel and you sense that the culture is there to do it, to make it happen, you will be successful. But you need to have a full transparency with the CMO about what they're strong at, what they're not strong at. And if you then can bypass it a little bit, I understand maybe for a small regional company it's difficult, but like with J&J, we could bring our SMEs, we could bring our technical experts. Maybe there was like cybersecurity, integrity issues that we could help. Then you could bring the right people at the table, or preparing for a health authority inspection. Of course, as J&J, you could do that. You had maybe a little bit more the power, but that's for me how it is. If you have the culture there, we were able to make it happen. And then transparency is key. Transparency, communication. You saw it also on the Simon Kucher. It is one of the top expectations from big pharma to work with the CMO. And then you can make it happen, and you're successful.
Just a quick follow-up there. Certainly in my experience of working with CDMOs for a long time, the dream for smaller CDMOs is to get one of those relationships and then maybe expand to commercial scale, for example. How does that work from the buyer perspective in terms of what happens if you have one of these top 10 CDMOs that have got a great relationship, but you're asking them to do more and more, the scope grows. Do you start seeing the stitches come off?
Yeah, honestly that's one of the pitfalls I always seen. With those top 10, as a team, you have procurement, you have the manufacturing guys, you have the quality, the safety, everyone is coming together. And you talk about the CMO, so you know really which are the top 10. There's no debate, you know that you can put additional activities there. But it's with the others. And that's typically what's happening. There's of course always pressure. Every department has their objectives, like procurement of course need to look at cost reduction. I was looking at quality and compliance, the manufacturing to the reliability, timeliness, etc., etc. So you have to be really aligned as a team. But the pitfall was that you have a good project with a certain modality, like maybe in small molecules, and suddenly it's positive, and suddenly you want to expand, and you start, and then you come into an area where there's maybe not the capabilities. Yes, the CMO or CDMO wants to do that. Yes, there is that ambition, but they are not capable yet. And that's a pitfall. You have to be very careful there. Yeah. And I've seen some situations that actually were like detrimental at some point in time and actually worsened the relationship with the CMO. There was one example also, like I think Oksana said it, we had one CMO that suddenly got it was in COVID times, suddenly they were doing the filling of some of the vaccines, and we saw all the expertise going to that area, and we saw really detrimental going very wrong. Signals were too late because it was so, in that time it was fast-paced, it was public everywhere, and then we saw actually the performance of the CMO dropping down.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You've actually just answered my follow-up question, which is well done for that as well. Nick, from your perspective, when things go wrong, obviously the guys have provided a perspective similar to yourself in terms of, when relationships break down, what are the common typical things that you see? Is it the transparency thing, for example?
I think there's an element around complexity, right? If the relationship becomes more complex than the governance model that you have, that's one element. Transparency is another. I think it's more when you start having the challenges around not being able to, move beyond the initial reaction or the initial barrier, whether it's internal, because normally when you have challenges externally, people internally will disagree on how do you address those. So having the one voice is extremely relevant, internally as well as externally. And having a joint path forward. And the moment you deviate from that, or the moment that that is unclear, it becomes more difficult to navigate issues as they arise, right? So if you're not trusting each other anymore in some of the basic things, then you cannot really tackle the complex things either. And I think that's where, when you have challenges, we are all in manufacturing, right? Issues arise. And most companies are not Johnson & Johnson, so that means that for everybody else, when we say jump, nobody else jumps. You kind of have to work together and jump together in the right way. And I think that's where having that open communication is essential to actually navigate it. I think the worst is people start operating in silos. So that's really a common issue. Maybe Raman,
sure. I just want to put something that Nick mentioned. Yes, you're not all Johnson & Johnson working with the CMOs, but be aware that so many big pharmas are working with the same CMOs. So what is also important that you understand who they're working for, because it already can give you an indication like what should I do myself. We were working with some CMOs that we were the biggest pharma company working. We had to triple down to work with. They were very crucial because they had a very specific capability because we couldn't find it elsewhere. But if you're smaller as a company and you're working with some of the CMOs and you know that they're, the biggies, GSK, J&J, whatever, BMS are working there, it doesn't mean that you have to lean back. But you have to understand that you're all doing the same. I had like a benchmarking with some of the other big pharma, the same roles I had. And it was good. We were convening like once in a month to share a little bit like how you do this and how you do that. We were not talking about CMOs, we were not talking about products, but you started to realize we all do the same. And that's good to be aware. So you have to look where you can really intervene and help to support the CMO in the area that you need and is not duplicating to the others. I hope this clarifies a little bit how to work.
It certainly does, and it's one of the reasons I think you guys are such a good panel, because you offer 3 different perspectives from a customer perspective, which I think is crucial for people here today. And on that note, we'll want to talk about the buyer's role. We touched on it a little bit. It's easy to blame a CDMO when something goes wrong, but obviously the buyer has responsibilities as well. And so internal teams need to be aligned, and scope needs to be clear, the briefing needs to be clear, decisions need to be, I suppose, integrated within the kind of sponsor side as well. So where do sponsors sometimes contribute to the problem? So Oksana, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yes, I think sometimes we really contribute. For our company, sometimes we combine different roles and we wear multiple hats, and in this way we can slow decision making, of course, and that's why we try to analyze our processes, how we handle, and in such way we can improve the communication, and we can improve the relationship with CDMO, because we just handle several roles for business development, for example.
And on that, I just want to pick up on something you said there, like kind of slow decision making. That's probably been the biggest bugbear of the CDMO industry for the last year that I've certainly heard of. Frustration around sponsors just taking forever to make decisions. Just maybe give us a sense of like why that is. What's it like on the other side of the fence, on your side of the fence, that contributes to this perceived sense of slower decision making?
For example, we can have initial idea to start one project for one country, but after that we can evaluate several countries, and that's why we try to multiply the volume, and we try to multiply creating brand strategy for our products. That's why we can slow decision making in general, because our initial idea was like a small idea, but after that we developed it, and we have a little bit huge project, but we didn't coordinate it at the initial stage.
Nick, I'm going to come to you next on the buyer's role, and you mentioned governance before, so maybe I'd love to explore that topic as well, relative to how the buyer can sometimes be not responsible, but can cause some of the challenges with relationships.
So I think it's about accountability. You mentioned that you heard a lot over the last year that the main issue is that decisions are slow. I think that's also part of how are you structured as a company. And I think there's a difference between clinical and commercial operations. But in terms of commercial operations, at least my expectations on my organization is that the teams that are engaging directly with our different partners are empowered to make 90% of the decisions themselves. So you have high-performing, small, effective teams that can manage that portfolio. They can operate independently. They don't need to ask for layers of governance to agree on a decision. They can, the best thing to do is to solve an issue on the spot. And that goes back to what is your manufacturing strategy? How are you tiering your partners? How are you engaging with your partners? What is your governance structure towards your partner? Which is, to me, the role as a buyer to say, how do I show up to a meeting? Am I ready to engage and solve some of those issues? And do I have that structure and that team that is empowered to actually do that? Like if you go into a meeting and you need to ask for permission later, then that doesn't work. So being able to make those decisions quickly is going back to how you're structured externally, but that also means how you're structured internally, because those teams need to be empowered. So how do you empower them? How do you make sure you have the right leaders? How are they clear on what the joint vision is? The vision of how do you operate externally and internally? How do those network, in my case, operate hand in hand? As well as what's your overall governance structure? Because you want to make sure that the guys that reach out externally are also all aligned. Because again, if people, quality, supply chain, procurement, BD, are operating independently, then as a contract manufacturer, you will get different messages on, okay, what is the priority? What do you want to be done? Again, which is not helpful to the overall objective of delivering medication to patients. So external structure is as important as internal structure, both of which are, from a buyer's perspective, how we organize ourselves. So it goes back to strategy and governance. And in doing so, clarifying, allowing the teams to make decisions to move forward, to drive the business, is much more effective. So we play a huge role in simplifying that.
Great perspective. Thank you for that. And Stefan, does that resonate with your experience fully, in terms of a big pharma perspective?
Governance is key, but I would say on top is the alignment. The alignment you need to have internally on all the functions. So what I've seen a couple of times is sometimes, procurement is going and talk with their peers, and then they're making a little bit like commitments, but it's not fully aligned with maybe all the others. And what I've seen more evolving in J&J when I was there is like more have full alignment before we actually have full visibility who is talking to whom. Just to make sure that you're not misstepping, because the CDMO also wants to get the business, and maybe there is an interesting cost perspective, and we will manage the quality side, we'll manage the operational side. So we have to get full alignment, and I've seen that governance also being sourcing committee, sourcing way of doing things, that you have a full alignment, that everyone is going in there. Yes, there are gaps. You know them, you can manage them, but you're fully aligned on that. That's for me the key part.
Just building on what you're saying, right? I think that's some of the things that we've implemented. And I think one of those things is that, on an operational setting, so I'm not talking clinical, I'm not talking BD, but when we are day-to-day, we manufacture every day, then in my organization, quality, supply chain, and the business are always together, meeting with our strategic partners. But not with everyone, because we cannot have the same relationship with 30 different people or 30 different organizations. But with our tier one, let's say the setup for the meetings are always the same. The frequency of the meetings depending on the tier, which goes back to your manufacturing strategy. But how you show up is what I mentioned earlier, is you don't show up alone. Because if there's an issue in operations, it's most likely there's a deviation linked to quality, or there's an issue in the manufacturing. So you need to have those people together to actually make the decisions. So it's also, how do you structure yourself going outwards? If it's just one person showing up representing the view and vision and feelings of somebody else, a different function, and nobody is there, then again, you have a follow-up. It's another email, it's another meeting, it's another touch point. That slows it down. So aligned internally, I fully agree, but also show up externally, aligned but together, so you can actually make the decision. And we request our external partners to show up in the same way, so that in 30 minutes, instead of having hours of emails or other meetings, you can basically solve 99% of all operational issues that you have. It's a huge cost saving, because we spend so much more time on efficiency and other things rather than trying to find time to discuss the basic things because we had someone that was key missing in the meeting.
Just want to give an example. And it's also the culture into the company, in the pharma company. And I talked about the culture in the CDMO. But I came into a situation, we had like a real bad performance, quality performance of a CMO. So we said we go there, full team, going there. The first topic on the agenda was the quality performance. And that was good, they listened, and that was clear. And then the next topic was like, what are the next businesses we'll do? And I said, guys, after the meeting, I will not come anymore. I will not come anymore to these meetings if you first bring the first topic, quality, and then you're talking again about like growth and what we will do additionally. That has shifted. And in the meantime, how it was performed is like even, DCAT. Many people of us go to DCAT to meet top to top. And the operations leader was coming into the meeting with one of the CMOs that also had like difficulties and said, well, we'll not talk about business. You guys have something to sort out. You have to sort out your quality and we'll not talk about business. That's also where I see, if you're aligned and you have like all the functions talking the same language, then you're more stronger and you can then partner. Again, it's not about blaming, it's then partnering again. What is needed to help them to get and have that longer term relation still in the view. Just wanted to give that because that's very key in why it goes wrong. Yeah. Because sometimes internal alignment is not always there. We talk different languages and you need to be all hand in hand. It's not quality is responsible for quality. Everyone is there. And it's the same cost also. I don't have to go to a CMO that is the most expensive. If others are, you all have to share the same values and the same objectives working with CMOs.
And that leads me nicely on to that next topic around handling a difficult conversation. You guys have just mentioned there, taking the right people, I think, Nick, you mentioned like taking the right personnel from your perspective to be there at the meetings. So I'm interested to explore how else you would go about handling the difficult conversations and to try and get the relationship back on track when it could be a quality issue, a missed milestone, a relationship breakdown, just a basic communications issue. So, Oksana, from your perspective, obviously the guys have given that perspective of taking the right colleagues. Obviously for a smaller organization, that's not always possible. So any insight you've got into how to handle those difficult conversations?
First of all, we do preparation, really good preparation, and I think it's key to handle the difficult conversations. So we try to involve colleagues from different departments to see global picture, and also we try to build several scenarios how to develop negotiations and how to handle the project. And from myself, I would like to add that we are humans, and good relationships and trust are very important. And if you have this building relationship, you can overcome obstacles. And if you will show your leadership, and if you are open to solutions, if you show that you're going to resolve any issues between your company and CDMO, in my practice, everything was good.
It's a great point, that, I have to say, well said. Stefan, as well, from your experience, maybe describe an example, if you have one, of where a relationship wasn't in a good space and you guys invested in resolving that, and maybe it ended up becoming not necessarily an amazing relationship, but a strong partnership with the CDMO.
Look, if you have a partnership with a CMO, you always look not only at the short term, you look at the longer term. And sometimes there are issues that are coming across, and we talked about it's about the trust and the transparency. So again, if you come into that type of escalation, you don't blame each other. You look at, there's probably things that the pharma company could have done differently, maybe the CMO, and you look at the common ground again. You look at how. So it's a difficult conversation because you have to call it out where things has gone wrong, but you have to look at how you can solve it, and you try to get transparency, because sometimes you feel like I said it already, you're in that boardroom and they're all speaking to your mouth a little bit, sorry to say that, but then you see deeper in the organization that things are not playing out. There's not a walk of the talk. And then you try to get to that in a constructive way, and then see, okay, let's bring, and again, I'm speaking about the perspective of a bigger pharma company, but then you bring your SMEs, you bring your people to the table to help to resolve. If there's like, a failing inspection, have maybe a complete response letter, you're in a situation that you maybe cannot launch a product, so you have to resolve it, and then have to open the books a little bit, be transparent, saying, okay, let's do this, we can do that. And of course, it depends on your longer-term relationship. It can also be like that. You said, look, this is like a CMO. We don't see them as strategic in nature. Well, you will pull a little bit more and more your activities away, and that's also the consequence. And there's strategic discussions internally, of course, happening, and seeing like, well, where do we see the CMO? Do we still want to put our effort in there? Yes or no? And if so, you put that. If no, well, you will little pull things away and look at other solutions there.
Nick, what from your perspective, what does a good escalation conversation look like?
Be proactive. Don't make it a difficult conversation, because it doesn't have to be a difficult conversation. Make it a regular conversation. If you go back to your manufacturing strategy, if you have a tier 1 supplier that should be your partner, then you should have a regular conversation on a regular basis. Then there is not such a thing as a difficult conversation, because you have a basis of trust. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Oksana, but go back to the 5 conversation model, right? How do you build trust? How do you establish that? How do you nurture that? You should have that relationship, and then anything else can be discussed. I think difficult conversations become difficult if that's the first time you're having this conversation. Then it's a difficult conversation because you have no basis to start with. Like, if you are having regular conversations about how you collaboratively, again, assuming this is a strategic partner, you want to maintain a long-term relationship, you have that base. You can build on that. You should have that regular interaction. And then it's not a difficult conversation anymore. It's just a regular conversation addressing an issue that arose, and you will find a collaborative way forward. So to me, the narrative around, there's a lot of discussions about it's a difficult conversation. Yes and no. If you have set up a model that is in light of a collaborative spirit and partnership, then there are no difficult conversations. They're just conversations that you need to have about topics that may be difficult. But the conversation is just a conversation between two people that have a shared vision forward. Clearly, if one of the partners is not having that same vision, or if your perspective of that relationship changes, the nature of that discussion changes as well. But having been in difficult situations where there are lawsuits and other elements, even then, operationally, it's cordial. Why? Because you have a base of engagement that is respectful, collaborative, forward-looking, even if you have a very difficult issue. So it's really how you structure and how you approach it from the beginning.
Yeah, super point. 90 seconds left, guys. So I want to... The point of this session wasn't to be so negative, just to be very clear. It was just to try and give some insight into why relationships go wrong. So to end with, I would love you to maybe describe a good partnership, maybe 2 or 3 words to describe what that partnership looked like, and I suppose any closing thoughts as well for our audience here. Stefan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think indeed, I think it felt like a little bit we look from a negative side, but you have always to look like from the positive ways. Like you have to invest, you have to put energy in there. So if you make a partnership with a CMO, you look at that common value, you look at that transparency, the trust, the culture. Is the culture fitting with the culture of the company? You know, also have a look like just not on that first thing that you will be doing. Have also internally an alignment. How do you potentially see the partnership going over time? I've seen situations, sometimes you start in API manufacturing, you start with maybe regular materials, then you do intermediates, and then you go to APIs. Do you have that common vision internally? Because suddenly maybe there is a procurement finds it interesting to have a good pricing for APIs, and you push them APIs, and maybe they're not capable of doing APIs. You know, so have that alignment. And then if you have that transparency, that communication internally, good alignment as a pharma company, and then also very good relationship and alignment with the CMO, I think you're on a good path. And then things are not perfect. Yeah. I've said on the 170, only 10, maybe I could, less than 10 are perfect. But that's not a problem. If the mindset is there, the right structures and governances and the communication, you can solve it. Yeah. You can solve it.
Thank you. Oksana.
I think we are well trained with metrics and KPIs, but there is also chemistry between partners and how we can define it and how we can feel it. And it's important from my side. And in other words, I would like to say that when you are realistic and you are very, very prepared for several scenarios, you can resolve any issues.
Thank you. Nick, finish off on a positive high note.
The trust, respect, and collaboration. I mean, everything can be achieved under those conditions. And I think I don't think I was particularly negative in this session. I think it's just looking, what is it that we can all do to improve that and have that joint vision and achieve that. So I think partnership is the core. And in order to achieve that, you can, however you measure it with KPIs or however you model, trusting relationship where you both respect each other and you have that collaborative spirit, you can overcome any issues. And I think that is the core to success.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was the ethos of this session today, is about being proactive, about being preventative. I think some of the perspectives, all of the perspectives, in fact, they gave us were fantastic. So please join me in showing your appreciation for our fantastic panel here today. Thanks, guys.